On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 209. Hamas agrees to send a delegation team to Cairo to continue the hostage negotiations as more details are leaked about the brewing deal. Dror Or, who was on the list of Israelis kidnapped on October 7th, is confirmed dead by Israel. His body is being held by Hamas. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reportedly told Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States objects to a Rafah operation at this time. Netanyahu's office immediately issued statements stating that he told Blinken that a Rafah operation is necessary in order to end the war. As the floating pier the U.S. is constructing in northern Gaza becomes operational, the Erez crossing is open for the first time since the war began. Leader of the Christian Party in Lebanon, Samir Jaja, challenges Hezbollah, stating that the group has not accomplished anything in the war and should withdraw from southern Lebanon. Turkey suspends all trade agreements with Israel and joins South Africa's ICJ case against the country, as Colombia goes a step further and suspends all diplomatic relations with Israel. Hello everyone. I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the latest highlights from the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of May 2nd, 2024 in the United States, the morning of May 3rd, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, on May 1st, Al-Ahbar, which is a Lebanese Hezbollah-affiliated newspaper, published details about what it stated is included in the proposal that was given to Hamas that reportedly was agreed upon between Israel and Egypt. I'm not going to give all the details here since it is very long, and also there have been multitudes of leaks that I've reported on in the last several summaries regarding what the deal may include. What Al-Ahbar did include is very nuanced differences regarding how many Palestinian prisoners are going to be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage and things like that. In addition to that, however, Al-Ahbar did add a couple of details. According to what was leaked, the proposed agreement does not include an ultimate ceasefire that Israel will agree to or has agreed to, but rather negotiations leading towards a long-term calm that will commence in the second phase of the deal. The deal, according to Al-Ahbar, includes 3 phases, each of them 42 days. The first phase focusing on what I've already reported, the release of 33 hostages in exchange for a certain amount of Palestinian prisoners. The second phase involves some sort of return to this calm and an IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And the third phase revolves something that I was asked about in recent comments. It involves the exchange of bodies of hostages and Palestinians who have died in Israeli jails and who have died in the war, exchanges between the sides, and a rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, on May 1st, New York Times also published information about the hostage deal that was proposed to Hamas. That report quoted 2 Israeli officials, each of them stating that in the proposal that was given to Hamas, Israel has agreed to give a lot of leeway with regards to the Netzarim corridor and essentially to remove almost all barriers with regards to Palestinian civilians that are returning to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. This has been a continuous demand of Hamas in negotiations. Hamas has demanded complete freedom of movement, and Israel has constantly said that it is going to monitor anyone who goes to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. According to the report in the New York Times, the 2 Israeli officials stated that Israel has agreed in the proposed deal to remove, one source said, almost all restrictions. Another source said all restrictions, i.e. there will be no restrictions on movement of Palestinians. Either way, again, like what I said about the Al-Ahbar, we're only going to learn what the final deal includes once the sides negotiate. However, this does give more information about why different sources in the United States are saying that Israel's gone a long way in giving compromises to Hamas, and now it is up to Hamas to agree to these compromises. Related to this, there have been several reports from Hamas and statements that were made in the last several days of different leaders regarding what is going to be Hamas's position. In the first place, on May 1st, Osama Hamdan, who is Hamas's representative in Lebanon, stated that the group is still considering the deal. However, he also added the threat, saying that if Israel launches any campaign into Rafah, Hamas is going to cease all negotiations and the movement refuses to negotiate under fire. On May 2nd, there were statements that were made by Sohail al-Hindi, who is a member of Hamas's political bureau, stating that Hamas is likely to reject the latest proposal since it stands firm on having an explicit call for an end to the war, a ceasefire, and IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and is not going to accept any vague terminology. Despite this, however, also on May 2nd, it was reported that Hamas's leader, Ismail Haniyeh, spoke to Egyptian intelligence minister Abbas Kamel, who is the Egyptian official who is handling the negotiations, and that Haniyeh agreed to send a delegation to Egypt to continue the negotiations. In the statement that was put out about this, Hamas emphasized, and I quote, the positive spirit that the movement is in which the movement is studying the ceasefire proposal, adding that the aim of the delegation is going to go to Egypt is to arrive at an agreed-upon formula and phrasing that includes a complete ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Shortly after, it was reported that the Hamas leader had this conversation with Abbas Kamel. Al-Arabi al-Jadid quoted the Egyptian sources sounding cautiously optimistic, stating that fine points of disagreement between the sides are still being resolved and that the country is hopeful that they will be able to reach a ceasefire and a truce and a hostage exchange in the coming days. Right now, where things stand, Hamas has still not given its official answer. This deal was brokered between Israel and Egypt last week. It was then proposed to Hamas. Hamas is reportedly debating this. What is happening right now? Hamas has agreed to send a delegation to Cairo, but it has not said if it accepts or rejects. It is very likely, and I've been predicting this in my last several summaries, that Hamas is going to try to prolong these negotiations as much as possible. That is probably one of the reasons that Hamas is stating on the one hand that it is viewing the deal negatively, on the other hand that it is considering it also positively, but is willing to negotiate, but it has reservations. All this is meant to be a tactic, likely, that is going to prolong the negotiations on the one hand, putting more pressure on Israel to continuously postpone the Rafah invasion, while giving a glimmer of hope that there might be a truce later on. Again, that at this point is speculation. What we know right now is that Hamas has said it is going to send a delegation to Cairo to continue the negotiations, but it has not given its official answer. In addition to this, related to the hostage situation, in Israel was reported on May 2nd that Dror Or, who was on the list of Israelis who were kidnapped on October 7th, is now confirmed to have been killed on October 7th and that his body is held in the Gaza Strip. It was not reported how this was determined by the country, if they found either more evidence in different operations in Gaza or something else that led to this conclusion. However, that is what was reported today. With that, the number of hostages that Israel has stated are confirmed dead and their bodies are held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip is now 35. However, it's important to note that different news outlets, among them the Wall Street Journal and other different outlets, have stated over the last several months that different intelligence estimates, both in the United States and in Israel, would estimate that at least 20 more hostages of those that are held are in fact dead. Moving on to the situation in the Gaza Strip. In the last several days, there were several barrages of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip targeting the southern parts of Israel. Specifically, the largest barrage was a barrage of 4 rockets that were fired towards the areas of Hulit. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were several air raids that were reported throughout the last several days and different bombings both in the central parts of the Gaza Strip and throughout. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, air raids were reported targeting weapons warehouses as well as military structures, launching sites, and other Hamas infrastructure in the last several days. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, several rockets and mortar attacks were claimed by the Al-Qassam brigades and other Palestinian groups targeting the IDF presence in the Netzarim corridor. Again, the Netzarim corridor is that corridor the IDF is maintaining that is dividing the Gaza Strip from the east to west, i.e. cutting it off from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. According to reports, there have been several different rounds of mortars and rockets that were fired at the IDF forces in that area. In addition to this, and related to this, IDF airstrikes were also reported targeting Hamas units that were firing mortars at IDF soldiers near the Netzarim corridor. In addition to that, on May 2nd, several different rounds of airstrikes were also reported targeting different sites in the Al-Nuseirat refugee camp. This was reported by Palestinian forces on the ground. It was not reported by the IDF what they were targeting in those bombings. In addition to that, in the last several days, there have been several notable bombings that also took place in Han Yunis, but more of them in the areas of Rafah and the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, and specifically focusing on the Rafah invasion. As the United States makes its objections to the Rafah invasion more explicit, the White House reported on May 1st that during Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Israel, he explicitly told Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States objects to a Rafah invasion at this time, and furthermore that Blinken suggested alternatives to such an invasion. Antony Blinken himself stated after the meetings that the U.S. cannot support a Rafah operation without a humanitarian plan, i.e. a plan to evacuate safely and care for the over 1 million Palestinian civilians that have evacuated to Rafah, and he added that the United States has yet to see such a plan. In turn, several hours after Blinken made those statements, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's office reported that Netanyahu told Antony Blinken that Rafah invasion is not contingent upon anything, and that Israel will not accept a deal that requires it to end the war. He also added that Israel sees great importance in completing the Rafah invasion, and that the war cannot be completed without Israel taking out the Hamas battalions in Rafah. Amidst this, it was reported on May 2nd that there is extreme rift that is growing between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the heads of Israel's security establishment. That includes Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Israel's Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, and the heads of the Israeli Shabak. According to the reports, the security establishment has made clear to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the IDF could withstand a pause in the fighting and return to defeat Hamas later on, or it could continue the fighting if it was given the orders, and similarly, that an invasion of Rafah could be carried out immediately, or it could be postponed to a later date. Netanyahu's lack of decision-making on those matters is reportedly causing extreme frustration in the security establishment in Israel, stating that the lack of decision-making is serving Hamas and damaging the achievements thus far. I remind everyone that as of April 7th, the IDF has pulled out of Han Yunis, and effectively there is no advances that are being made by the IDF in the Gaza Strip at this time. In fact, since April 7th, we're now coming close to a month, the IDF is maintaining the Tzarim corridor. Other than that, there have been several small-scale ground incursions in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip and the central parts. Other than that, the only IDF activity that's going on is airstrikes at this time. Somewhat reflective of this, of the frustration in the IDF and the confusion regarding if a Rafah invasion is going to happen or not, if a deal is going to happen or not, on May 1st, two contradictory things were reported by the IDF with regards to the preparations for the Rafah invasion. Another sign that the invasion is up and coming, the IDF put out Arabic messages to the population in Rafah, updating them on the expansion of humanitarian zones in the Gaza Strip. While this was not an evacuation order, the IDF did state that the areas in the northern parts of the El Mawasi refugee camp and the areas between El Mawasi and Han Yunis are now expanded safe zones, and that humanitarian aid is going to flow to those areas when they are ordered to evacuate, again signaling that the IDF is still preparing that invasion. At the same time, on that same day, the IDF reportedly discharged a portion of the reserve units that it had called up in order to prepare for the invasion of Rafah, since the invasion is currently stalled, and the IDF did not want to just hold on to these units without having anything to do with them. So that reflects this ongoing stalemate that the IDF is sensing right now, and possibly this rift that is developing between the security establishment in Israel and the Prime Minister Netanyahu. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. The United Nations Development Program put out a report on May 2nd stating that over 370,000 structures in the Gaza Strip have been damaged during the war, and that over 79,000 are completely destroyed. The organization surveyed both satellite images and took reports from the ground in order to compile this report. The agency added that based on the rate of reconstruction following the previous rounds of escalation between Israel and Hamas, the rebuilding process is likely to take until the year 2040. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip since my last report 3 days ago on April 29th, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 263. 11 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 3 days, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,603. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 108 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip since my latest report, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 34,596. 77,816 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. I remind everyone that the IDF has stated that between 12,000 and 13,000 Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terror operatives have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. The IDF has not updated those numbers in over a month, so that is the latest figures that we have regarding what the IDF estimates are the violent operatives that were killed in the Gaza Strip out of the total number of Palestinians who were killed. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Politico reported in the last several days that work on the pier that the United States is constructing in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip may be completed by the upcoming weekend, allowing the maritime corridor to become operational already on Saturday or Sunday. On May 2nd, the White House reported that the pier is going to become operational in the coming days. However, the White House also added that bad weather conditions have held this up for a few days. However, it is expected to become operational in the coming days, starting the activation of the maritime corridor between Cyprus and Israel to allow humanitarian aid to flow directly into the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, on May 1st, it was reporting that the Erez crossing, which is the most northern crossing in the Gaza Strip between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and it was prior to October 7th the largest crossing, has been opened for the first time since the war began. A convoy of 30 trucks from Jordan passed through the crossing directly into the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, carrying food and medical supplies. The World Food Program announced that it has set up warehouses and other infrastructure in the region close to the Erez crossing on the Gazan side of the border in order to facilitate the transfer of food, stating that a steady supply of food is needed. It needs to enter the Gaza Strip in order to overcome 6 months of hunger. Other news, on May 1st, Jordan announced that 2 of its convoy trucks were attacked in Israel by, according to Jordan, radical settlers. One was reportedly headed to the Kerem Shalom crossing, and the other one was en route to the Erez crossing. Other reports added that the convoys were attacked by protesters, and that some of the aid in the convoys was looted. There was no specific information given regarding who those attackers were. However, this did occur in Israel, not in the West Bank, so it may have been settler groups, but it was not settlers, it was likely protesters within Israel. In addition to this, as part of his visit to Israel, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken toured the port of Ashdod and inspected the procedure of humanitarian aid being unloaded and inspected in Israel on its way to the Gaza Strip. This is important because Blinken is due to report to the U.S. Congress next week about Israel's living up to international law and its obligations to allow humanitarian aid to come into Israel. Blinken also toured the areas around the Gaza Strip, including one of the kibbutzim that was heavily attacked on October 7th, as well as the Kerem Shalom crossing. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a lot of IDF activity and several different confrontations that were reported throughout the West Bank in the last several days. On May 1st, confrontations were reported between the IDF and different Palestinian factions in the areas of Kalkilia, and there was other IDF activity that was reported in the areas of Hebron, Bethlehem, Ramallah, Tubas, Nablus, and Jericho. On May 2nd, IDF activity was reported in the areas of Idna, this is west of Hebron, and Beit Omar in the northern parts of Hebron. In addition, there was also IDF activity that was reported in the Gilazon refugee camp near Ramallah and in several different other Palestinian villages. Regarding the arresting of Palestinians, on May 1st, the IDF reported that 9 Palestinians were arrested throughout its different operations, while the Palestinian Prisoner Society reported that 20 Palestinians were arrested on May 1st and 15 were arrested on May 2nd. It's important to note that the Palestinian Prisoner Society includes East Jerusalem in its reports, whereas the IDF does not. It's possible that is the source of discrepancy. Either way, we're looking at between 9 and 30 or 35 Palestinians that were arrested in the last several days in the West Bank. Other news related to the West Bank. Ahmed Abu Faoul, who is a member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Nur Shams brigades, this is the area near Tulkarem, was reportedly killed on May 2nd by the Palestinian Authority security forces. Palestinian Authority spokesperson stated that Abu Faoul, who was wanted by the Israeli forces, opened fire at the PA vehicles before he was shot and killed. According to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, this is not true. They said that he was executed by the Palestinian Authority as he was trying to serve Israel's needs. Other news related to the West Bank, an unauthorized Israeli settlement outpost that expands the areas of the Ofra settlement in the West Bank was evacuated by the IDF between May 1st and May 2nd, only to have settlers return to re-establish it on the following day. Settlers reportedly burned tires blocking roads leading to the unauthorized outpost. Following the violence that ensued during the evacuation, it was reported in the last several hours that 20 IDF units are involved currently in the evacuation procedures. In addition to this, there were reports of several different settler attacks that occurred throughout the West Bank. This is a video that was published of an attack that occurred as settlers threw stones at Palestinian cars along Road 60. However, it was not reported specifically where this attack took place. Other news, the IDF and the Shabak reported that in January, a unit of 3 Palestinians were arrested in the Yabit village, aiming to set up infrastructure of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the area. 2 of those arrested were reportedly in contact with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad leadership in Lebanon and had received funds from them, and they were all experimenting with different types of explosives while they were arrested. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon and Syria, there were continuous rockets and missiles that were fired by Hezbollah targeting the northern parts of Israel in the last several days. Rockets targeted the areas of Metula. There were also rockets sent toward the areas of Hardov and other areas throughout the Upper Galilee. In addition, there were anti-tank missiles that were fired towards areas of Shtula and Shomra. One of these managed to hit a house directly, causing substantial damage. Regarding IDF activity, on May 1st it was reported that IDF warplanes targeted Hezbollah military structures and infrastructure in the areas of Merohin and Ita el-Sha'ab. In addition, there were other airstrikes reported in Tir Herfa, and El Miadin reported attacks in the areas of Jabal Balat, as well as Rashia al-Fawar. On May 2nd, there were similar attacks. It was reported that the IDF carried out airstrikes against Hezbollah structures in Ita al-Sha'ab, as well as attacks in the Shaba region. In addition to this, Al-Manar also reported artillery fire in the areas of Al-Mash'ab and Al-Avona, as well as in the Rashia al-Fawar, Al-Mash'ab, and Tir Herfa region. In these different strikes, Hezbollah announced more deaths of its operatives, stating that the total number of operatives that have died since the war began is 290. The IDF states that number is much larger. By now, the IDF is stating that it is close to 350. Other news related to the northern front of Israel and southern front of Lebanon. On May 1st, in an AP interview, the leader of the Christian party in Lebanon, Samir Jaja, challenged Hezbollah, stating, and I quote, "Hezbollah is not the government in Lebanon, and no one has the right to dominate the destiny of the state or its people." He added that Hezbollah's operations against Israel have done nothing to help Gaza, and explicitly called upon Hezbollah to withdraw from the border and deploy the Lebanese army there based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It's important to note that while this is right now just a statement that's being made, Jaja does lead the largest party in the Lebanese parliament. He's also one of the most vocal oppositions to Hezbollah at different times. Seemingly he's trying to now position himself again as an opposition to Hezbollah, but that is an important voice that is being heard as different elements both in France and Amos Hochstein, the special envoy of the United States, are trying to develop a diplomatic resolution between the countries. Other news relating to Syria. On May 2nd, for the first time since April 1st, Syrian news sites reported that an IDF carried out an attack in the outskirts of Damascus. The Saudi Al-Hadith reported that the target was a Hezbollah outpost near the southern airport of Damascus. This was later confirmed by the Syrian Human Rights Observatory as well. 8 people reportedly injured. Syria stated that they are Syrian soldiers and that the site was a Syrian site, not a Hezbollah site. However, again, both of those other outlets, which are relatively trustworthy, stated this is a Hezbollah outpost in that region. Moving on to some of the political developments for the last several days. On May 1st, Colombia announced that it is severing its ties with Israel. Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who in the past has asked to join South Africa's ICJ suit against Israel and has been one of the most vocal critics of Israel since the war began, stated that the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu are committing genocide in Gaza, and the country wants to have no more affiliation with that country. In addition to this, Turkey announced on May 1st that it is joining South Africa's case against Israel in the ICJ, i.e. that it is joining the case charging Israel with genocide. In addition to this, on May 2nd, Turkey made good on its threats from a few weeks ago and has completely banned all imports and exports with Israel. Turkey and Israel have had thriving trade agreements over the years, and the move is expected to have substantial impacts on the different sectors of the different economies, primarily on the Turkish economy. According to some reports, the trade between Turkey and Israel throughout 2023 amounted to $6.8 billion, with 76% of that being Turkish exports to Israel. In Israel, it was reported that the country is already preparing how it is going to compensate for this ban, but right now, according to at least official reports, there is a complete ban on all trade agreements, imports and exports between Turkey and Israel. Some reports relating to the future of the Gaza Strip. On May 1st, the Saudi Elaf news network reported that in a conversation between Antony Blinken and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to enter into the negotiation process regarding the future Palestinian state that would obviously be relating to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Sources quoted in the news site confirmed that Saudi Arabia is starting to abandon the vision of normalization with Israel as part of a deal with the United States, as instead pursuing its own track with the U.S. that will be separate from the deals with Israel, focusing on containing Iranian aspirations and Saudi Arabia getting a civilian nuclear program in the country. Amidst this, alongside these reports, on May 2nd it was reported that the Saudi authorities have begun a campaign of arresting any Saudi citizen who publicly speaks out against normalization with Israel. According to reports, some 400 men have already been arrested in this process. So what that tells us is, on the one hand, Saudi Arabia is starting to build contingency plans if Israel is not willing to advance normalization talks that Saudi Arabia is including in them Israel recognizing a future Palestinian state. At the same time, however, Saudi Arabia has not turned away from that entirely and is arresting people who speak out against this prospect. Other news related to the Gaza Strip and associated with what I reported before about the breakdown in the relationship and trust between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli security establishment. It was reported today that one of the main sources of frustration within the security establishment is Prime Minister Netanyahu's refusal to advance a day-after plan and decide what's going to happen in the Gaza Strip. According to reports, the security establishment has signaled to Netanyahu that from a security standpoint, in order to stop Hamas from returning, the viable options are either IDF active occupation in the Gaza Strip, or the establishment of a local government that will be made up of Fatah members in cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, as well as regional actors. Both of these options, however, have been rejected by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he said they're not on the table. Netanyahu has on the one hand said there's not going to be an active occupation in the Gaza Strip, only that Israel will maintain overarching security. On the other hand, he's also said that Israel is not going to entrust local Palestinian actors, and thus the security establishment is feeling if there is no day-after plan, there's no way to ensure the successes that the security establishment is seeing in the war. It was also reported that different elements within Israel's security establishment, presumably this means Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, are stating that there is no point in carrying out the Rafah invasion if actually there is no day-after plan, because there's going to be no other government that remains in Rafah after Israel then evacuates, and all the successes that may happen dismantling Hamas's battalions will not be maintained in the long run. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my summary from the last several days. Thanks for watching.